Show is up through June 10th.
Yes.
So please tell people about the show and encourage them to come. But now I'm going to turn it over to Travis from Queer Art and to Marco, the reason you came. So please give it up for Travis.
Hi, Marco.
Hey, Travis.
Maybe a good place to start before we ask our question of the audience is to talk just briefly about how this show came about.
Okay. So for the past few years, I've been kind of doing a bunch of little things, and I was talking to my mentor, Liz Collins, and she was saying, she actually was like, I don't think you're ready to do something. And I was like, well, I have tons of work for it, and it's all the same color. So she kept that in mind, and then I got an email from her saying, Greg from the Bureau of General Services Career Division is looking for a new show to fill this space because her show had to be moved to a later date. And she said, email him right away. So I emailed him right away. And we talked, I came, I brought some samples of works. I brought like some of these smaller paintings that could fit with me on the train. And we talked about what my vision was, what I was looking to do, and what I wanted to do with the space and the story I was telling. Yeah, it's been up ever since. So. I was thinking of questions, and they were all a little bit more direct, but this is like a more open-ended question, which was, can you actually sit down?
If the show was a superhero, what would its powers be? What would its powers be?
Are we supposed to answer that?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Any sort of specific power that you imagine it? If it were an X-Man or had its own, like, yes.
I was thinking of X-Men. It kind of reminds me of Mystique from X-Men in that she's a shapeshifter, and so I see this as like so many different expressions of, like, this just shows who you are in so many different forms and versions of yourself, kind of like, I don't know, Mystique.
I would just say to take something that may be more complex and distill it down to something that's more of like a symbol.
Very deep and intimate power.
Interior design.
Yes!
Pantone.
What?
Pantone.
Oh, wow.
It's very animated for me, so I feel like it would give you something, and then it'd be like a little pill that you could take to make yourself whatever you want it to be, like a better self.
I was thinking like the ability to like shut your mind off to mind readers.
That's cool.
Also Animorphs.
Nice.
It's like Midas.
Yeah. Like touching things and it turns into another.
I mean, you have a lot of gold around here, basically.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of alchemy, you know?
Yeah.
When you brought up Midas, that was something that I thought of the entire time while making this body of work, because the manic experience is much like the Midas story, where he wanted everything he touched to turn to solid gold, and then his daughter turned to gold. But in this context, it's like anything became of value in that manic state. So to give a little bit of background, all this work is based on euphoria and bipolar mania, which is a physical state when you feel like a king, like a prophet, like it's the best day of your life, like hypersexual, like a genius, like everything is happening in the right way, zero inhibition, lack of awareness, and kind of a transformative personality. To make a long story short, I ended up, in 2013, I had this manic episode, and I ended up hospitalized. And this work was all, for the most part, inspired by that era, because it was so rich, it was so spiritual, it was so, I felt prophetic. And I did feel this energy and spirituality and connection to my roots, racially, my queer identity, gender identity. I just felt everything and was just deeply in my feelings, because that's what it's like when you're manic and you feel these and ideas to the point where people think you're nuts, which is what people did, and that's what put me into the hospital. But
Where were you?
I was in Bellevue Hospital. It all began when I was kind of not sleeping too much. Like I threw this party, like this all black and white party, and I was like planning it, and I didn't sleep for a whole 2 nights, and I was like hypomanic then. And then it kind of was building as the semester grew, and then I just was reaching, and it was like right towards the summer, and I was going to stay in New Paltz for the summer working, and I was like staying up all night and writing these notes. I typed up all these little epiphanies that I was having about my life at the time. Leading up until that point, I was actually, when I was at the peak of my mania, I was listening to Power by Kanye. And if anyone has seen that video, it's like this very, like, kind of fantastical, heavenly, golden, in the clouds vibe. And I felt like I was in that. And I felt very connected to that. And I was like, I'm a genius. And then that night I was drinking a 40, and I was like, I'm gonna make it to the top, and I'm gonna bring you all with me, and I'm gonna get rich. And then people were starting to like kind of distance themselves from me a little bit, and I was like, what's going on? I'm like, my twin sister, she ended up coming to New Paltz because my friends had called her and my family to like find a way to trick me to come back to the city. And so she just came up, and I remember I was just like super hyper, not sleeping, intense, passionate, yelling, preaching. Another interesting thing to bring up was I like came out many times over the past however many years, but this was, I think, part of what sparked the mania was like being so repressed for so many years. When I came out, I was like, I'm queer, this is my truth. And I made my pilgrimage to all my friends and told them my truth. Everyone was saying, you're bipolar, you need help. And eventually I was like, fuck, maybe I do need to get out of here. So I ended up going back to New York, and then I ended up checking myself into Bellevue because I just couldn't get in touch with anyone. I was like trying to call all these different hospitals under my insurance, and Bellevue just picked up, and that's just where I went with everyone. And yeah, that was a really intense experience too. I was just, you know, newly out in a manic state, thinking I was a pop star, telling everyone, hyper confident. Like I was living with like drug addicts and homeless people, but I was so confident and like had no fear and just felt like a star. And like was wearing my scrubs and like.
And how long were you at Bellevue?
For 2 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah. My work has been pretty much all about this experience to some degree for the past 3 years. I was making this triptych and thinking about how I wanted to make it and what colors I wanted to use. I came up with this kind of Miami Vice, Florida, like tacky color palette that I just like found with pencils, like in like my set of colored pencils. And I was like, this looks really like tacky and like cheap and like I love it. And so my intent with it was to evoke a mood of vice and kind of cheap thrills and neon lights and something that is, you know, is thrilling in the evening but leaves a bad taste in your mouth come morning. And I think it captures the essence of what mania is when you feel like that. The gold and the color, but then there's like the knife and the rose has thorns, and the rose is beautiful to look at, paint, touch. In terms of color palette, that's kind of what I was going for, and I felt like I could just keep pulling from it because there was so much narrative. This is from one note that I had. I was just in my sketchbook, I wrote one of the greats, and I was like, I'm one of the greats. Like, I was doing a lot of karaoke at the time and singing Prince and Frank Ocean and just like feeling and loving it. And then I wrote a list of all these artists that I admired and felt like I was one of them. And so I was like, it'd be cool to make a wall of one of the greats. It's like kind of like a wall when you look at like a plaque. And then I put myself in that piece as I saw myself at that time.
Let's see if we can figure out which one you are.
Yeah.
Does anyone know? Play it, sorry. Is that right?
Yeah, that's it.
And so tell us about with the imagery of that?
For that one of me, that was a selfie that I took in my bedroom in school wearing a do-rag. And I also made all of them crying.
Is it that you see them as suffering as well, or are they?
Kind of. I like to think of, like, I felt like I was one of them, so I like to think of all of us as like a body of people, a collective of people, and we're all going through the same thing. It's like I'm just one of them. And I was just like, just not caring. Just like, and that's not what I'm like as a person, like, because I do care. And I was like walking, or I was like wearing my shirt open, and you know, I just became this character. It is like looking at like a movie, or you're like a character that you played in this moment. Like it's an entirely different person.
And when you were making this, did you still feel that way?
No. I haven't felt this way since. I think there is a similarity and continuity to my work. Like I like bright color. I've always been drawn to graphic image making and color and separation of color. It just became a lot more focused because I really painted with 4 colors in the past few years, except for like these pieces, which are a little bit different.
Tell us about these.
So these are called Selfie Tableau. The first one that I made was actually during this time of my life, and then I revisited it, and I just tried it. Basically the way I make them is I take a selfie photograph and then paint on top, like an inkjet print, and then paint on top of it with black and white acrylic paint. I take these pieces of construction paper, which are pink and blue, and then find ways of reinventing it. With these, I thought of them as step away from this manic story. I think of them as mini tableaus. When you think of a stage picture or a scene, I don't know, like the angel one with the halo, I took that selfie when I got a new job and I left this horrible work environment, and I took that selfie, and then I was like, oh, that reminds me of like feeling like joyful, and I like putting my head through a skewer of an olive and of a martini.
Why is the color palette so limited on this?
I think partially I like having these routines and ways of going about making things. They also reminded me of the origin of gendered colors, which are baby blue and pink, and you know, I even think of, I have a twin sister, and like when we were younger, we were like pink and blue, because they are pastels and they're not so loud, and I feel like it's sometimes easier to make a statement with them without like a bold red or a hot pink. As you can kind of tell, I like making things on a grid, like here and here. I like making a lot of things, and the ones that didn't fit, I just thought weren't strong enough and weren't compelling enough. I also am a big supporter of projections and tracing. Like I don't feel like, I'm a very impatient person and an impatient artist, and I'm like, I want to have lips. I'm not going to draw them and have to like find a journey of perfecting them.
Yeah.
This piece, which is called The Truth, was the first of this body of work, and this was made over the course of 6 months. And this tells these, I think they all do relate, but I think these smaller paintings that are like high above were more a continuation of that feeling in my present day. They aren't as specific to the manic story like all of these higher paintings are, but these are. This is the rising action, the climax, and the aftermath of the manic episode. I tried to capture what that feeling was through symbols. And as you can see, I'm very into symbology and
Where are your symbols coming from? Are you drawing on particular cultural histories, or are they particular to something?
Yes
Yeah.
and no. I have Brazilian roots, and I'm drawn to like a tropical environment and color palette. And while I was manic, I was looking at these La Loteria cards, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. They're a Mexican bingo game, but have these very beautiful graphic. There are these beautiful graphic cards, and they're like El Borracho, like the drunk, El Corazón, the heart. And while I was in this state, they're like this they look like tarot cards, but they're not, but they're very beautiful and graphic. And when I was in that state, I would switch the card. Martina was like, look, it's like the mermaid, I feel like the mermaid, or like, I feel like the sun, or whatever. And so she was like, just switch the card based on how you feel. And so I was doing that when I was in that state. And so I carried those cards as symbols for each element. And I put my own face, because I've drawn these like mask faces that I did for a while, that, on top of them, that made it into my world. And then this is the aftermath when I came back to New York and stayed at my mom's. And then those actually, there's like little like spark like looking emphasis on one of the buildings, because when I came back to my mom's, I actually was like very suicidal. And I thought like the balcony really made me paranoid, so I captured that in this. And this was like, then the heart was speared. But there's duality, like and here in the beginning, the face is upward, this pink face, because I was just in my beginning, and then in the aftermath, the head was flipped upside down, because my world was turned upside down. And there's misery in this last painting, but there's like new light in the star, posting hundreds of circles of any circle that I would find, all on sets of 3. And so these were actually like the iPhone circle back in like the iPhone 4 era, when there was a little square in it, because now they don't have it anymore. So I captured that because I was like really into the Instagram thing. This was my ex-boss, this devil lady, who I had a sudden vengeance against, that I wanted to write a New York Times op-ed article against her, and I wrote her this long, nasty email, and I was like, I need to just get back at her. And
Did you send?
Oh, yeah, I did. And she
Wow.
wrote back. This phallic shape, that's meant to be a phallus, holding the world on his shoulders. I made a disguised phallus. I went through a lot of repression. When I first revealed this, I had 300 roses. I couldn't fit them all this time. So that was my offering. And then I also wore all white, because I felt reborn. And it was a new beginning, because I was putting this to rest. But for me, I think it could be anything. It could be candles, it could be objects. This was kind of a tribute to freedom and to leaving my past behind and letting it rest. And all the pain and the suffering and depression and crazy out-of-body experiences, like they're kind of left in these walls or these doors. So that's like my offering to let that be. I'm doing a project for queer art for our annual, and my goal is to do a 3-part series of work, and one is these shadow boxes of the mermaid, the man, and the sun. And then a shack that's brown on the outside, gold on the inside, which looks kind of like something that a homeless person would have. Because when I was in that site where I lived with lots of homeless people, and then when I was removed, I felt this kinship to people on the streets who were mentally ill, who had the same exact situations as me, and the only difference between us was my privilege. Something that I'll never forget was when I was on Main Street and I found this dried up cricket, and I was just like in the throes of this, and I picked it up and I was like, this has powers, it has healing powers. And I was like, this is beautiful. This came from the earth and it's dried up, and I need to give it to someone. And I went up to some guy in the street, and I was like, I was trying to explain to him, like, this has healing powers. You need to take this. And he just looked at me like I was crazy. But I feel like that captures the feeling of mania. A lot of people have come to me after the show and were like, I'm so sorry that happened to you, and you know, that must have been so horrible. And I feel like I meet them with at a different place. You know, this feels like such a long time ago. I've made so much work and I've had so much to draw from, but I've moved on, and I'm a stable person. So after finishing this, I've always been making tons of work, and after I put this show up, I kind of like haven't done anything for a while. I'm like, I'm just gonna chill. I'm going to Brazil this summer, and I plan to just travel a bit and do something else, and maybe even I think it's with creating a narrative that's so heavy and specific, it comes with a certain responsibility, but I also don't feel like I'm the poster child for like all of those situations. And I also like other things. I'm super into taking pictures of things on the street and maybe making like different objects and things, and doing something that's more sculptural, making books, just something new. Yeah.
I'm noticing with your selfie tableaus that sometimes the selfie of you is either really large or really small, and so in terms of scaling, like, how did you decide which of those should have like a really large face and which should have a smaller face?
Well, so at first I would just crop these pictures and then print them out, and then they would just come out how they came out, and then I would paint on top of them and see how it was. And then after a while, I was like the martini glass, I made that really small. So it changed as time went on, but yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the four faces underneath the guy?
So these, I don't have any of that style of work featured in the show, but I've made masks for years on cardboard. They're very flat masks. If you could imagine those like kind of yay big and on a wall. My intent with them was, how can I create a new expression? And with these, I think they're just different moods of like peak mania. In one moment, you're feeling like a king, and then at one moment you're really angry. And I think the masks live in this world as kind of otherworldly beings. They don't really have hair, they're not gendered, they're just faces. So, yeah.
Is the selfie tableau for sale here?
Yes.
And are all of these in there?
Yes, all of these are.
I think all the work on
And
video
those?
is for sale.
Yeah,
right?
all the work on
And
video
those-
And
stuff.
the pricing list is over there, I believe. correct?
Yes. Thanks, Travis.
Do you have a website?
I do.
What is it?
MarcoDaSilva.net.
And do you have an Instagram?
I do. It's at Quaint Struggle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for being here. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you,
Very
Travis.
Very proud of you. Excited for you.
Thank you so much. That was great.